The stars had always seemed like a distant, untouchable dream to most people on Earth. They were just tiny lights scattered across the night sky. But that was before the message arrived. It came from the farthest corner of the galaxy, a place humans had never explored. The message was weak at first, a faint whisper among the noise of space. But as days passed, it grew louder, clearer, and it carried a plea. The Valorians, a peaceful and advanced alien race, were in desperate need of help. Their planet, Valor, was dying. A rogue star had entered their solar system and was sending deadly radiation toward their world. Their once beautiful oceans were now drying up, and the air was growing thinner. Cities that had stood for thousands of years were crumbling, and their people were running out of time. The Valorians had sent out messages to other advanced civilizations, hoping for a response. One by one, their calls were ignored. The Galactic Union, the largest group of powerful alien species, had turned their backs on them. The Union believed that every species must face its own destiny. The Valorians had no choice but to perish. After all, saving them would require resources, time, and effort, things many of the other civilizations were unwilling to sacrifice. But then the unexpected happened. Earth, a planet in a distant corner of the galaxy, responded. The message had arrived at the United Coalition on Earth. For days, world leaders, scientists, and diplomats debated. The message was serious, urgent, but there was a problem. Earth was not yet a superpower. Their technology was still growing, and their resources were limited. Could they afford to help? What if the mission failed? What if it cost them everything? Dr. Layla Carter, a young and passionate astrophysicist, was among those who had studied the message closely. She had spent years researching space, and the Valorians were one of the most intriguing civilizations she had encountered. She knew their plight was not just about saving a planet. It was about saving lives. But more than that, it was about something humanity had always believed in, the value of helping others. As the debates raged on, Dr. Carter stood before the United Coalition's leaders. She knew it was her moment to speak. She cleared her throat and began. "We can't turn away," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The Valorians have reached out to us, not because they think we are the most powerful species, but because they believe we are the most compassionate. If we don't act now, they will be lost forever. And what does that say about us as humans? That we only care when it's easy. That we walk away when things are hard." Her words struck a chord with the room. The room was silent for a moment, and then one by one, the leaders began to nod. They knew the risks, but they also knew what it meant to be human. Humanity had always believed in the power of kindness, of standing up for others, no matter the cost. In the end, the United Coalition voted. The decision was clear. Earth would respond. They would help the Valorians. As the news spread across the world, the people of Earth felt a mixture of excitement and fear. They were about to take on a mission unlike anything they had ever faced. The journey to the dying world of the Valorians would be long and dangerous. But there was no turning back now. They had made their choice. In the quiet moments after the vote, Dr. Carter stood in her office, staring at the stars. She had always wondered what it would be like to look up and see another civilization, to know there were others out there. Now she knew, and the thought filled her with both awe and a deep sense of responsibility. The Valorians weren't just a distant species anymore. They were her mission. They were her people, just as much as the people of Earth were. She couldn't help but wonder, would humanity succeed? Would they really be able to save them? But one thing was clear. Humanity had made a choice. They had chosen to act, to help those in need, even when the galaxy had turned its back on them. And in that moment, Dr. Carter knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. As humanity prepared for its bold mission to save the Valorians, an unexpected wave of resistance swept through the galaxy. The news of Earth's decision to intervene spread like wildfire. Many alien species, especially those in the Galactic Union, were furious. How could a lesser-developed civilization like Earth dare to interfere in the fate of a species like the Valorians? The Galactic Union, a group of powerful and advanced civilizations, had a strict rule: no outside interference. The Union believed that every species must face its own challenges, and helping the Valorians would not only be risky, but it would also set a dangerous precedent. If the Valorians were saved, what would stop other planets from asking for help? And what would it mean for the balance of power in the galaxy? Leaders from the Galactic Union were quick to issue a statement, urging Earth to reconsider its decision. They warned that stepping in to help would have serious consequences, and it was unlikely that the mission would succeed. The rogue star that threatened the Valorians' planet was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The radiation alone was enough to destroy even the most advanced space shields. And with so many unknowns, the Union was certain that Earth was making a grave mistake. But humanity stood firm. Earth's decision was not driven by power or glory. It was driven by compassion. While the Union debated and warned against interference, Earth worked tirelessly to prepare for the rescue mission. The United Coalition knew the risks, but they also knew that they could not turn their backs on those in need. In the midst of the growing pressure from the Galactic Union, Dr. Layla Carter found herself standing before a new group of people, Earth's most experienced diplomats and military leaders. She had been called upon once again to help lead the charge. "The Galactic Union says this is a mistake," she said, addressing the room. "They believe the Valorians' death is inevitable, and that no one should intervene. But I ask you, what do we lose by trying to help? What does it say about us as humans if we walk away from a planet in need?" Her voice was steady, and she spoke with a quiet confidence that seemed to inspire those around her. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. It was true. Humanity had always prided itself on its compassion, on its willingness to fight for what was right, even when the odds were against them. The diplomats exchanged glances, their faces filled with doubt and uncertainty. But in the end, they too understood. The choice had already been made. Earth would save the Valorians, no matter what the Galactic Union said. Meanwhile, the Valorians continued to face the terrifying reality of their dying planet. Their leaders knew that their only hope rested with the humans who had promised to come. But even as the Valorians clung to hope, there was a growing fear among their people. What if the humans couldn't make it in time? What if they failed, just like everyone else had failed them? Back on Earth, the preparation for the mission was already underway. Teams of engineers, scientists, and military personnel worked around the clock to build massive ships capable of carrying the Valorians to safety. They had to be fast. The rogue star was growing more unstable by the day, and the window to save the Valorians was closing. But it wasn't just the Valorians who needed saving. Earth itself was under pressure from the Galactic Union. The leaders of the Union made it clear that they would not tolerate any interference. Their ships began to gather near Earth's orbit, ready to make their presence known. It was a subtle but clear threat. The message was simple: Earth should stop before it went any further. But despite the mounting pressure from the Galactic Union, humanity pushed forward. They had made a decision, and they were not going to back down. They knew the risks, but they also knew that this mission was about more than just saving a distant planet. It was about proving that humanity was capable of something greater. It was about showing the galaxy that Earth stood for something different. As the human ships set off toward Valor, Captain Idris Nolan, the commander of the rescue fleet, stood on the bridge of the lid ship. He looked out at the stars, the vastness of space stretching out before him. The Valorians were counting on them. The galaxy had turned its back on the Valorians, but Earth had chosen to act. And Captain Nolan couldn't help but think, maybe that's what made humanity different. They didn't always make the smartest decisions. They didn't always have the best technology. But when it came to compassion, to doing what was right, humanity was willing to risk everything. "We'll get them out," Captain Nolan said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "No matter what the galaxy says, we'll get them out." The journey to Valor was not an easy one. The human fleet, consisting of dozens of ships and thousands of personnel, sped through the stars, carrying the hope of an entire alien race. The path to the Valorian system was long, and the obstacles they faced were more dangerous than they had anticipated. But there was no turning back. As the fleet moved deeper into space, the crew worked tirelessly, preparing for the challenge ahead. The lead ship, the Aurora, was piloted by Captain Idris Nolan, a seasoned leader known for his calm in the face of adversity. Alongside him was Dr. Layla Carter, who had become the mission's scientific director. Her knowledge of astrophysics and space exploration had been invaluable, but even she was beginning to feel the weight of the unknown. "We're getting close," Dr. Carter said, glancing at the navigation screen. The Valorian system was just ahead, but there were still unknowns. The rogue star that threatened the Valorian world was unpredictable. It could flare up at any moment, releasing deadly radiation that could destroy everything in its path. And they didn't know how long they had left before that happened. Captain Nolan nodded, but his face was grim. "I know, but we're not turning back now. We can't." The rest of the crew worked quietly around them, aware of the risks they were taking. Some of them had never been so far from Earth before, and the weight of their mission was clear to all of them. This wasn't just about saving a planet. This was about proving that humanity could be a force for good in the galaxy. As they neared Valor, the true scale of the disaster became apparent. Through the viewports of the ship, they could see the planet's once beautiful blue oceans had turned a deep dry brown. The atmosphere, once rich with life-giving gases, now seemed thin, almost fragile. The cities on the surface appeared abandoned, their once proud spires now crumbling ruins. There were no signs of life on the surface. "Is anyone even left down there?" one of the crew members asked quietly. Dr. Carter shook her head, her eyes fixed on the view. "There are survivors, but they're scattered, hiding from the radiation." As the fleet entered the Valorian atmosphere, the ship's hull began to heat up from the intense radiation. Despite the shielding, the sensors picked up fluctuating bursts of radiation. It was clear they were running out of time. "The sooner we can get them out of here, the better," Captain Nolan said, his voice firm. "We'll need to start evacuations immediately." Dr. Carter worked with the engineers to prepare the evacuation systems, which included giant transports that could carry large numbers of Valorians at once. But there were complications. The atmosphere was unstable, and the storms in the sky grew more violent by the hour. The rescue ships were in constant danger of being hit by sudden bursts of solar flares. Every move they made could be their last. "We have to get these people off the surface," Captain Nolan said, his gaze hardening. "Time is not on our side." Despite the challenges, the rescue operation began. The first ships that landed on Valor carried emergency medical teams and supplies. They were met by Valorian survivors, many of whom were too weak to walk on their own. The human team worked quickly, using the limited resources they had to set up temporary shelters and provide the Valorians with what little they could. It was a fragile operation, but it was all they could do for now. In one of the shelters, Dr. Carter met a Valorian elder, his face lined with age and sadness. He looked at her with gratitude, but there was also a deep sorrow in his eyes. "You came," he said softly. "We thought no one would come." Dr. Carter placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a smile. "We couldn't leave you," she said. "We're here to help." As the days passed, the human team worked around the clock. More and more Valorians were brought to the evacuation ships, but the dangers of the collapsing planet grew more intense. The radiation levels continued to rise, and the Valorians' once thriving world was slipping away. There was no time to waste. The Valorians were a peaceful species, kind and wise, but they were no match for the catastrophic forces tearing their world apart. As the evacuation continued, Dr. Carter and Captain Nolan shared a quiet moment of reflection. "We've come so far," Dr. Carter said softly, staring at the sky. "But it doesn't feel like enough." "Not yet," Captain Nolan nodded. It's never enough. We'll save as many as we can. The task ahead was enormous. No one could be certain that they could evacuate all the Valorians in time. The rogue star was growing ever more dangerous, and Earth's fleet was struggling to keep up with the growing number of survivors. But one thing was clear: humanity would not give up. They had come too far, and they would not leave without doing everything they could to save the Valorians. In the end, it wasn't about the technology or the size of their fleet. It was about the spirit of humanity, the determination to act, to help, to be a light in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And as the human ships lifted off from Valor, carrying the last of the survivors to safety, they knew one thing for sure: they had made the right choice. The evacuation of the Valorians had begun, but it was far from easy. The human fleet, under Captain Nolan's command, was working against the clock, racing to get as many Valorians off their dying world as possible before the rogue star unleashed its deadly radiation. It was clear that the planet couldn't hold on much longer, and the Valorians needed to be saved. Fast. The first few evacuation ships had already made it back to Earth with groups of survivors, but the situation on Valor was growing more dire with each passing hour. The sky above the planet was filled with swirling clouds of ash and debris from the collapsing atmosphere, and the ground trembled as shockwaves from the dying star reached the surface. On the surface, the human teams were working hard to transport the Valorians to the evacuation ships. The air was thick with dust, and the temperature was unbearable. Every step they took was a risk. Yet the humans moved with a sense of purpose, determined to do everything they could to help the Valorians. Dr. Layla Carter was one of the first to land on the surface, working with a team of medics and engineers to stabilize the refugees and get them to safety. She had seen many difficult situations in her career, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of so many Valorians struggling to survive. Many were weak, some barely able to move, and the rest looked on with a quiet despair in their eyes. But even in the face of such hardship, there was a sense of hope in the air. The humans had arrived, and that meant there was still a chance. "Help is here," Dr. Carter whispered to herself as she looked around at the devastated landscape. She had to believe that they could save them. "We'll get you out of here, all of you." The Valorians were a peaceful species, known for their advanced knowledge of science and their deep understanding of the universe. Yet even their greatest minds had been powerless against the forces of nature. The rogue star had come out of nowhere, catching them off guard, and quickly ravaging their planet. Many of their cities had already collapsed, and entire regions of the planet were now uninhabitable. The Valorians' technology was advanced, but it was no match for the raw, destructive power of the star. As Dr. Carter worked alongside the Valorian scientists, they shared their knowledge and skills to create temporary shelters and protection systems. Valorian engineers, though weak from the heat and radiation, offered invaluable assistance. The humans and Valorians had formed an unlikely alliance, one forged in the fires of disaster. But there was still much work to be done. Meanwhile, Captain Nolan remained aboard the Aurora, overseeing the operation from space. The danger of the collapsing star was growing, and he knew the evacuation had to be completed soon. His crew worked around the clock, ensuring that the evacuation ships were ready to carry as many survivors as possible to safety. But the situation was becoming more complicated. The Valorians were scattered, many too far from the landing zones to make it in time. "We need to move faster," Captain Nolan said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We can't wait for them to come to us. We have to bring the ships closer to the surface." The human fleet had to adapt quickly. The ships were large, and the atmosphere was unstable, but they had no choice. The crew began coordinating the descent of multiple evacuation ships, each one descending toward the planet to pick up groups of Valorians who couldn't make it to the landing zones on foot. It was a dangerous maneuver, but it was the only option. On the ground, Dr. Carter and her team heard the roar of engines as the first ships descended from the sky. The Valorians looked up in wonder, their faces lighting up as they saw the rescue ships coming closer. It was hard to believe after everything they had been through. But there was hope now. Humanity had kept its promise. "Stay together," Dr. Carter called out to the survivors, guiding them toward the ships. "We're almost there, just a little farther." The Valorians, weak but determined, followed her lead. They moved slowly, but there was no hesitation in their steps. For the first time in days, they felt a sense of peace. The humans had arrived. They had chosen to help when no one else would. The ships began to fill up quickly. Every time a ship left the planet, it was with a sense of relief. Another group of Valorians was safe, on their way to a new world where they could start over. But there were still more left behind. The evacuation ships couldn't carry them all in one trip. The rogue star was closing in, and there was no more time to waste. Back on the Aurora, Captain Nolan watched as the last of the ships made their way toward the planet's surface. He knew that time was running out. The radiation was becoming unbearable, and the planet's gravity was starting to shift as the star's collapse neared. The evacuation had to be completed, no matter the cost. "Hold tight, everyone," Captain Nolan said, his voice calm but resolute. "We're getting you out of here." The last evacuation ship had barely lifted off the surface of Valor when a loud rumble shook the atmosphere. The rogue star was no longer a distant threat. It was now a force of nature, pushing against everything in its path. The planet was dying, and the once beautiful world of the Valorians was beginning to crumble into dust. Captain Nolan stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching the final moments of Valor slip away. The vast landscape that had once been home to a thriving civilization was now a world of ruins, shattered by the forces of the collapsing star. It was hard to believe that the beautiful blue oceans and green forests were now lost forever. But amidst the destruction, there was hope. Humanity had done what no other civilization had been willing to do. They had saved the Valorians. The last evacuation ship cleared the planet's atmosphere, and the fleet turned its course toward a safer region of space. The journey to safety wasn't over yet. There were still Valorians aboard the ships who needed medical care, food, and shelter, but the hardest part was behind them. They had made it off the dying planet in time. Dr. Layla Carter stood by the window of the Aurora, staring out into the vastness of space. The relief of saving the Valorians was beginning to sink in, but so was the weight of the responsibility. They had given these people a chance at a new life, but that was only the beginning. Now they had to find a place for them, a place where they could start over, rebuild, and live in peace. The Valorians had always been a peaceful species, their culture built on kindness, wisdom, and the pursuit of knowledge. Dr. Carter couldn't imagine how it felt for them to have lost everything: friends, family, homes. But as she looked at the faces of the survivors, she saw something more than sorrow. There was gratitude, determination, and hope. They had made it out of the ruins of their world, and now they had a chance to build a new future. "Captain, we've reached the designated coordinates," the communications officer said, breaking Dr. Carter's thoughts. "The nearest habitable planet is within range. We can begin the settlement process." Captain Nolan turned to Dr. Carter, his expression thoughtful. "This is it. This is their new beginning." Dr. Carter nodded. "We've given them a chance, but we have to make sure they're ready for this next step. They'll need help adjusting, and we'll need to build new homes for them. But I believe they can do it. They're a resilient people." The fleet began its descent toward the new planet, a place where the Valorians could start over. The planet, while uninhabited, was rich in resources and had a climate that was suitable for the Valorians. It was as close to a new home as they could hope for, but it was also a fresh start, and that came with its own set of challenges. As the ships landed on the new world, the survivors were greeted by the sight of a lush, green landscape. Tall trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the air was fresh and clean. For the first time in what felt like forever, the Valorians stepped onto solid ground, without the fear of imminent destruction hanging over them. "This is beautiful," one of the Valorians said, his voice filled with awe. "We never thought we would see another world like this." Dr. Carter smiled, walking beside him. "This is your new home, and we'll help you build it." The Valorians, though weakened by their time on Valor, began to show signs of life again. They worked alongside the humans to set up the first shelters, and soon the landscape began to change. Tent-like structures became permanent homes. With the help of the human engineers, the Valorians were able to set up a basic infrastructure, ensuring they had access to food and clean water. The humans had not just brought the Valorians to safety, they had given them the tools they needed to start over. It was a long road ahead, but the first steps had been taken, and Dr. Carter couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had given a forgotten species a chance at life, and it had made all the difference. As the days passed, more and more Valorians settled into their new world. They began to rebuild, but this time there was no sense of rushing. There was no fear of an impending disaster. They could take their time and build a new society, one that honored their culture and history, but with the hope of a brighter future. Captain Nolan stood beside Dr. Carter as they watched the Valorians begin their new lives. "We did it," Dr. Carter said softly. Captain Nolan nodded. "We did, but it's not over. We'll be here to support them every step of the way." And with that, humanity's mission was far from complete. The journey was just beginning, not only for the Valorians but for the people of Earth. Together, they would forge a new future in the stars, a future built on compassion, unity, and the belief that no civilization should ever be left behind. The days following the Valorians' arrival on their new planet were filled with both hope and uncertainty. The survivors, once weak and struggling to survive, were now beginning to find their strength again. The lush green planet offered them the chance to rebuild, but it was clear that this was just the beginning of their journey. Captain Nolan stood on the deck of the Aurora, gazing out at the new world below. The horizon was dotted with the first signs of human-made shelters, and he could see groups of Valorians working together, starting to cultivate the land. The planet was beautiful, peaceful, but it was still wild. The humans had provided the tools, but now it was up to the Valorians to shape their future. Dr. Layla Carter walked up beside him, her eyes also drawn to the landscape below. "It's incredible, isn't it?" she said, her voice filled with awe. "They've only just arrived, and already they're working together, building something new." Captain Nolan nodded. "It's inspiring. But we can't forget that there's still a lot of work ahead. This planet might seem perfect, but it's not without its challenges." He was right. The planet was rich in resources, but it was also untamed. The Valorians had no experience with survival on such a world. They had been raised on a planet with advanced technology, and many of their ways of life depended on systems that no longer existed. Earth's resources could only do so much. They would need time to adapt, and that time was something they could not afford to waste. Dr. Carter sighed. "I know. And the Valorians will need help. Their people are skilled in science and knowledge, but they need more than that to thrive here." Captain Nolan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Are you ready to help them build a future, Layla? This isn't going to be easy." She smiled faintly. "I didn't become a scientist to sit back and watch. I'm here to help, and I think we can make it work." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. The Valorians were divided into groups based on their skills, and each group worked alongside humans to set up agriculture, build permanent homes, and secure food sources. It wasn't a quick process. The land was fertile, but the Valorians didn't know how to work it like humans did. They were used to farming in controlled environments, not the wild fields of a new world. Despite the difficulties, there was a sense of camaraderie between the humans and Valorians. Every day, they learned from each other. The Valorians taught the humans about their advanced knowledge of the stars and the cosmos, while the humans shared their expertise in agriculture and engineering. It was a partnership built on trust and mutual respect, something that seemed rare in the galaxy. One evening, Dr. Carter walked through the new settlement, watching as Valorians and humans worked side by side, planting crops and building homes. She saw children playing in the distance, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a beautiful sound. It reminded her of Earth, of home. She walked over to one of the Valorian engineers who was working on setting up a water filtration system. "How's it going?" she asked, smiling as she approached. The Valorian looked up at her and nodded. "It's going well. We've been able to adapt the technology we had from our home world, but it will take time to make it work here. The planet's water is cleaner than we expected, but we need to build a more efficient system." Dr. Carter crouched beside him, examining the equipment. "We can help with that. We've had some success with similar systems on Earth. Maybe we can combine our ideas." The engineer's eyes lit up. "Yes, that might work. The water here is abundant, but we need to make sure it's safe for everyone." Dr. Carter spent the next few days working closely with the Valorian engineers and the human team to refine the water filtration system. It wasn't easy, but together, they managed to build something that would provide clean water for the entire settlement. As the days passed, Dr. Carter found herself more and more amazed by the resilience of the Valorians. They had lost everything: their homes, their planet, their way of life. But they had not lost their spirit. They were determined to start over, to rebuild, no matter how difficult it might be. One afternoon, as Dr. Carter was walking through the settlement, a Valorian approached her. It was the elder she had met during the evacuation, the one who had looked at her with gratitude when they first arrived on the new planet. "Dr. Carter," the elder said, his voice filled with respect, "I wanted to thank you. You and your people have given us a chance to live again. We will not forget this." Dr. Carter smiled warmly. "You've done all the hard work. We've just been here to help. Your people are strong, and I know you'll make it." The elder nodded, his face calm but filled with emotion. "Together, we will rebuild, and we will honor the memory of those we lost." Dr. Carter felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't speak. She just nodded, knowing that the road ahead would not be easy. But it was a road they would walk together, and that was enough. Months had passed since the Valorians settled on their new planet, and the settlement was starting to look like a true community. What was once a barren stretch of land had been transformed into a thriving colony. Lush fields of crops grew alongside tall buildings that seemed to rise out of the ground, as if they had always belonged there. The Valorians and humans had worked side by side, each bringing their strengths to the table. Captain Nolan stood outside the main settlement, watching the sunrise. The sky was clear, the air was fresh, and the planet seemed to hum with life. It was a peaceful world, one that would allow the Valorians to rebuild. The threat of the rogue star had faded into the past, but the future of this new colony was just beginning. He was joined by Dr. Layla Carter, who had been instrumental in the survival of the Valorians. Together, they had seen the people of Valor overcome the greatest challenges, and now they could finally breathe a sigh of relief. "It's hard to believe it's been this long," Dr. Carter said, gazing at the settlement. "They've come so far." Captain Nolan nodded. "They've made a home here, and they did it on their own. We only provided the first push. We gave them a chance," Dr. Carter said softly, "but they're the ones who carried it forward. They didn't give up." As they stood in silence, a group of Valorian children ran past them, laughing and playing. Their laughter filled the air, and it was a sound that made Dr. Carter smile. It was the sound of a future unfolding, a future where the Valorians would thrive once more. But there was still work to be done. While the settlement was growing, there were still challenges ahead. The Valorians had made incredible progress, but they had only begun to explore the full potential of their new world. The planet's resources were rich, but they had to learn to use them carefully. It was a delicate balance, and it would take time. Dr. Carter's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Dr. Carter, Captain Nolan, there's someone who wants to speak with you," a young Valorian engineer said, approaching them. The two humans exchanged a glance before following the engineer to the main hall of the settlement. Inside, they found the Elder, the same one who had thanked them when they first arrived on the planet. He was waiting for them, his face filled with a quiet intensity. "Elder," Captain Nolan greeted him with a respectful nod. The Elder smiled warmly, his eyes reflecting the wisdom of a lifetime. "I wanted to speak with you both, to thank you once again. But more than that, I wanted to share something important." Dr. Carter stepped forward. "What's on your mind?" The Elder motioned for them to sit. "When we arrived on this planet, we were broken. We had lost everything. Our world, our families, our history. But now, I see something different. I see the future, and I see how our people can contribute to the greater good." Captain Nolan raised an eyebrow. "How do you mean?" The Elder looked out the window toward the vast, fertile lands. "We have always looked to the stars. We were once a people who studied the universe, and we believed that one day we could share our knowledge with others. But in our time of need, it was humanity that came to our aid. It was humans who chose to help us when all others turned away." Dr. Carter felt a sense of pride rise in her chest. The Valorians were a people of great knowledge and wisdom, and to hear them acknowledge humanity's role in their survival was deeply humbling. The Elder continued, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "But we are not only here to survive. We are here to contribute. We have the knowledge of the stars, the science of the cosmos, and the wisdom of ages. We wish to share this with you, to join humanity in the pursuit of greater understanding." Dr. Carter's heart swelled with emotion. The Valorians weren't just surviving. They were determined to thrive. They wanted to be a part of something bigger, to offer their knowledge to help humanity and others across the galaxy. "We would be honored," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. Captain Nolan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's the beginning of something incredible. We're not just helping each other survive anymore. We're building a future together." The Elder smiled, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Yes, a future where we stand side by side. A future where no one is left behind." As Dr. Carter and Captain Nolan looked around, they realized that they were no longer just rescuers. They were part of a larger, ever-growing family, a family that reached across the stars. Humanity had given the Valorians a chance at life, and in turn, the Valorians were offering their wisdom to the universe. Together, they would build a future of peace and knowledge, one where every civilization had the chance to rise. The horizon before them was vast, filled with endless possibilities. There was no way to know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, Captain Nolan and Dr. Carter both felt certain of one thing. Humanity and the Valorians had started something that would change the course of history, and together they would make it a future worth living.